Well, Jade, thank you so much for joining me in this episode of Lynch with a Leader. It is an honor to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. This is great. I'm excited.
You are like a superstar in my family. I told you a little bit. My daughter and son in law are like massive fans of yours. Did you ever dream that your life would be where it is today?
Absolutely not, Mike. I take very, very little credit for anything that's taken place that's good in my life. God has been good, and He's kind of just directed this path with me and my husband. And I, it just kind of seems like a pattern at this point that I think I have an idea, and then I look up, and God has said, "No, you're going to go over here instead." And it's always better. And I've just learned over time that God's plan is so much better than mine, and I'm happy to follow.
If we would just learn that a little bit earlier. Isn't that funny how
It is.
we think if God would just give me controls, I would do so much better at it. What have you learned about how God's plan for your life, why it's so much better than anything you could ask, dream, or imagine?
Oh man, I think it's because he made us, and so he knows us. He
Yeah.
knows us better than we know ourselves. And so I remember when I was coming to Ramsey, some of the questions I had were, well, will I be able to have this skill set, or will this fulfill me, or will I be all those
Yep.
questions that we ask ourselves. And once I got here, I started realizing, man, God knows me better than I know myself. I didn't know I enjoy writing so much, but he knew that. I didn't know that I would
Mhm.
enjoy counseling people with their money to this extent, but he knew that. And, he gives us our talents. And sometimes we think that we know the best way to use them. And maybe that is the best way to use them for a while, but God
Yep.
has always got something better in store. So
So take me back to Jade. You're about to celebrate some birthdays around your household with
that's
some
right.
little ones. Take me back to little Jade growing up. When you were a little girl growing up, where did you see your life going? What was your design of what life would look like?
Well, my dad was a football coach. And so initially I wanted to be a football coach. I thought I'm going to be the first woman football coach, and I'm going
Love
to be
it.
cool, and I'm going to be like on the sidelines with all the big athletes. And then I realized, okay, maybe I'll just play sports. Like
Yep.
I'll just play sports for a while. And everybody kind of thought that that would be my trajectory. I'd go on and maybe play volleyball in college and then go play overseas and do it like that. And when I was just about my junior year in high school, I really started falling in love with music. I'd always loved music, but I kind of started thinking, you know what, maybe this is my path. And I remember when I told my parents I want to go to college and major in music, it kind of took them for a loop. Like, we thought you would choose sports science or, something like
Yeah.
that. And then in college, I went to school on a D1 volleyball scholarship. And when you play sports, there's a lot of yelling. Like, there's a lot of, it's mine, I'll go, go team, all this stuff. And I remember my voice teacher saying, hey, you're going to have to choose. You can't scream your voice out every week. And I remember after 2 years being like, you know what, I have to choose, and I'm going to choose music. And it was like, oh, what is happening? And so that started a music and entertainment career. And I did that for about 15 years until I joined Ramsey.
Wow. So you go back, your dad's a football coach, you are going one direction, you go another direction. Now you're always talking to couples and people about their money, about making very smart deposits into things.
Mm-hmm.
What are great deposits your parents made into Jade that helped you be who you are today? What were some little things they
Mm.
did along the way that helped shape who you are today?
I think the biggest thing is you always do your best.
Mm.
Like, there were these small little habits that my dad instilled into us every single day. It was, you wake up in the morning, you make your bed. You don't leave until your bed is made. You tuck in your t-shirt. Like, you don't, it was just, my dad was all about order and not being sloppy and
Yep.
showing up your best self. And it's kind of funny because I have found as an adult, and even leading up to this point, it's actually not that hard to stand out and be given an opportunity if you do the basic little things right, right? You show up on time, you have your shirt tucked in. You know what I mean? Like, it's those little
It
things,
is.
you say please and thank you, all of those things that people kind of take for granted, but have also kind of fallen off in culture. Those are the things that people are still looking for. And if you can do that and do what you say you're going to do, listen, you're already out in front of just doing what you say you're going to do. You're already out front from a lot of the competition. So
It really is funny. And we talked a little bit about our children earlier. I remember when my kids were growing up, I said, listen, IQ is only going to take you so far. But if you'll
mhm.
show up, you will do what you say you're going to do, and you act like you're happy to see people and you're nice to people,
Uh-huh.
you'll always get ahead. You'll
My
always get ahead.
my grandma used to say, act like you got some home training.
Well said.
You know?
Well said. So you and your husband met in college, correct?
That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
So when you guys got married and you stood at the altar and said, I do, what was the life you were planning on building together? And then come to find out later, maybe we're not working off the right set of plans. So how did you set out to build a life together as a husband and wife?
Well, the idea was we were both musicians and we both had music degrees. And my husband's a bass player and an arranger and plays multiple instruments. And so we just kind of thought, hey, you'll probably get picked up with some big artist and you'll go on tour and I'll just stay home. And, maybe if we have kids, I'll stay home with the kids and that'll kind of be our life. And it 100% went in the opposite direction.
Mm,
We got out of school, and I guess because I'm a vocalist, there were more opportunities for me. And
mm,
so it kind of, that plan shifted and we started following a little bit more in the opportunities that the vocals were providing. And we didn't have kids until 10 years later. And
wow.
so it was just a complete and utter shift. And a lot of that was because of our debt. And I'm sure we'll get into that
Yep.
story. We had a lot of debt, almost 500,000, and a lot of it was student loans. Most of it was student loans. And so at that time, we really did need to go wherever the opportunity and wherever the money would take us so that we could pay off that debt.
And would you have said the American dream at that point for Jade was, we're going to make a lot of money, we're going to spend a lot of money, I don't really know how we're going to get ahead, we're going to survive? What would have been the American dream for you at that point when you're chasing gigs and chasing things, which is just part of life? You're
Yeah.
doing that. How would you have qualified what that dream was for you at that point?
Oh yeah. When we first got married, I thought, you get married, you get a house, right? You have kids, you get 2 new cars because you deserve it, right? You've graduated from college, so he gets a car,
Yep.
she gets a car, and there's this part of you that wants exactly what your parents have,
Mm,
but you
mm,
want it right away, right?
yep.
Because you see your parents, what you're forgetting though is that they've worked 30 years beyond you, right? And so it's like, that was the American dream. I should be able to come and go as I please and spend what I want and come home to this beautiful home, and it shouldn't cost me much. And I was wrong about that.
So you found yourself, and this is the part where the whole story really spins here. You find yourself was it $480,000?
460. Yeah,
Four
a
hundred sixty
lot.
thousand dollars in debt. What strain was that putting on the two of you to shoulder that burden? And what was the defining moment? I know you hit it at the beginning of your book. What was the defining moment when you're like, okay, we can't survive like this?
Oh my gosh. The strain was a lot. By nature, I'm not bent to be a worrier much. I'm very glass half full. I'm very positive. My husband is more bent to the worrying, calculating, looking at the future. And so when we started realizing the amount of the debt, he was really taking it in a hard way. And I remember my husband is, even though I'm into numbers, he's really into numbers. Like
Mhm.
he's always crunching numbers in his head. And I remember, in the mornings we'd be standing in front of the mirror brushing our teeth, and I could just see his wheels turning in the mirror as he was brushing his teeth. And he would come out and he'd say, Jade, I calculated, I think that if we get after it by the time we're 50, we can be out of debt. And him saying things like that made me realize, man, this never leaves his mind. Like this
Mm,
is
mm.
this is weighing him down on a daily basis. And it was a lot. It was a lot going on. And I think both of us knew that if we didn't make massive changes, our life and this picture of what we wanted would never, it would just never happen. And so early into it, there were a lot of moments that I thought, man, this is not sustainable. And this is not the way God wants me to live my life. This is not life to the fullest by any means. I mean, I'm going to the grocery store. I'm afraid my card is going to decline. I remember one time we had, started the debt-free journey, and, money was still tight because every cent we had was going towards our debt. And I remember my sister was somewhat local. We were in South Florida, and she had visited Orlando to go to Disney, and she had a health scare at the park, and ended up in the hospital. And I'm like, what is going on? And I remember, she was about 3.5 hours away from where we were living in the hospital. And for me, rock bottom was, man, I don't have the gas money to fill up the car to drive this 3.5 hours, hang out with her, sit at her bedside, and then come back. And that for me that was it. That was, I don't know, Mike, if I've ever felt a greater shame in that moment over past mistakes. And I was like, God, if you can help me through this, I'm going to do better. Like, I'm going to be a good manager of your money.
What was the emotion you felt when you hit rock bottom? What was the spin in the gut that you felt internally when you hit rock bottom that could have driven you to go, dude, I quit. I'm not doing this. We're going to go back. We're just going to live like everybody else and pretend it's not there. Or B, I'm going to stick with this, and rock bottom is going to make me dig my heels in even more to not be here longer. What would you say was the emotion you were feeling?
Well, in that moment, a lot of shame, definitely a lot of embarrassment. I remember calling my dad and asking for money. I'm like, Dad, if I'm going to go see, my sister, I need some money. And, when you're a kid and you move out and you're on your own, especially once you get married, that's like, the walk of shame in that way. And so I remember feeling just a lot of embarrassment and a lot of, I should be further along than this. And so for me, a lot of people ask that same question. Why didn't you just go back to the old way? Like, so many people, they just survive on their credit cards. And for us, I think we were so far gone that just wasn't even an option. You get to the point where you are using debt to pay for your debt, right? If you get to the point where you have so much debt that you can't cover your bills, well, next thing you know, you're taking out credit cards to cover your bills and debt to cover your debt. And so we were already to that point. And so I always tell people, man, there is some beauty in hitting rock bottom, because when you open your eyes, the only direction you see is up.
That's right.
So
that's right.
there is something there. And, my parents raised me in church, and, I know a little bit of scripture, and those things are in my heart. And so I knew that this was not God's plan for me. I always talk about Jeremiah 29:11, and he's talking about hope in a future. And I looked on my future and I didn't feel hope. And so that alone, I knew something was wrong. It gave me anxiety. It gave me fear. And I'm like, this is not right. And so I think for me, that was a core feeling of, hey, I know life is not supposed to be perfect, but I also know that I've dug myself a hole here, and it's not supposed to be like this.
What's a secret you and your husband did to stay on the same page? Because keeping yourself going is one thing. Keeping two people going, and you hear this in your counseling a lot, is a whole different ball game. What's something, looking back in the rearview mirror, you guys did well at sticking in it together?
Well, there's some part of it. And I listen, I always bring it back to this, because sometimes you're just young and you're stupid and you just don't know any better. And so in many ways, I think we were just so young, and we were so love goggled. We had our love goggles on. So it was like, we've got each other and it's just you and me. And some of that, I'll be honest, was just baked in. Sam and I have always been very close, very good friends. We were best friends before we got married. And so there was a lot of that just kind of was already in the foundation, if I'm being honest. But in the hard times, I think in the hard times, what we really just leaned on was time is going to pass anyway. And you and I, we're in this for the long haul. And, we reminded each other all the time, like, listen, this is forever. And we're going to look up 10 years from now, and we are either going to be the same, worse off, or better off. And we get to choose that every single day. We get to take a step closer to where we want to go, or we get to fall behind. Like, these are our choices. And I think for us, it was, a lot of real talk and a
Mm,
lot of
mm.
sobering conversation. We've never shied away from saying the facts. And, I remember one time saying to my husband, do you understand that if we don't pay this debt off, we're never going to be able to have a family? Like, we can't afford to have a family. And I mean, just saying things like that and then going, oh, and then it's that sobering moment of,
Yep.
okay, like,
Yep.
we've got to regroup and we've got to do this. And so a lot of the conversation kind of always centered back to, what is it that we ultimately want? Well, we ultimately want a family, and we ultimately want to be able to raise them without the stress financially that, both of us experienced at certain times. And we knew that we wanted to start a business to where we could just breathe a little bit, because at that point, our careers had us traveling 35 weeks out of the year. And so there were these kind of keystone points that we were like, hey, we said that this is what we care about. We said these are our goals. Let's lock in. Like, let's keep going.
That's fantastic. Well, I want to applaud you, because the reality of life, so I've pastored for a long time, and the reality of life is it's really easy to quit. And quitting
Yes.
is, and even if it's one person keeps going and the other one quits, it's
Mm-hmm.
just easier, but
Yeah.
it's not worth it, but it is easier. And here you are getting on the cusp of some birthday parties. How different would those birthday parties look if this was Jade and Sam 10 years ago? How different would you be feeling going into a weekend where you've got two kids having birthdays? How different would you be as a couple if you're like, okay, I don't know how we're going to pay for this? Well, how different will those parties be compared to
Ooh.
where you are now?
I gotta believe they would feel a little bit more like a burden than a blessing, for number
Well, that's
one.
good. That's
It's,
good.
our kids, they don't know about debt. They don't know about that tight feeling. And we try to teach them about it. I mean, we tell them all the time, mom and dad, we used to do this. And, well, what is debt? Well, debt is when you borrow money and then you owe it to, we're
Yeah.
teaching them that, but they don't know about that. And so it's actually kind of funny. We've crossed into a territory, Mike, where we teach a lot about contentment, and we
Mm,
teach our kids a
mm.
lot about being thankful, because there is there is something to be gained from a struggle, right? Like,
Yep.
it
Yep.
does give you peace of mind, and it gives you a strength of character. And so, I would never trade the reality that Sam and I went through. But with our kids, it's like, okay, they're not going to experience that. Now, we're always building into them, hey, what we have is a blessing from God. What we
That's right.
have is like, this is overflow, guys. This is not, and so now on these birthdays, we do have to be like, okay, let's hold back a little bit, because they listen flat out, you don't want to raise a spoiled kid.
That's
So
right.
that's where we're at right now, if I'm being honest.
That's really good. And boy, what a great thing to know it on the front end, not go, oh man, we should have done that on the back end. So it's
That's
great,
right.
because contentment's hard. Contentment's a hard one, especially when you're a striver, and because God does not have any problem with us setting goals and striving for them, but
Mm-hmm.
he wants us to be happy with what we have. How hard has it been for you and Sam to learn contentment? Is that been a
Oh,
struggle, because being entrepreneurs and wanting to do things on your own? How have you balanced that in y'all's journey?
I think it's easy. In many ways, I want to say it's easy for me to be content, because we had to be for so many years with so little. There was a time where we lived in a house and we sold all of our furniture, so we were living in the house with no furniture. And I remember some buddies of ours came over, and usually we would go to our friend's house, to hang out on a Friday or whatever. And for whatever reason, they're like, well, we never come to your house. And I said, well, we don't have any furniture. And I think they thought that we were exaggerating. And so they came over, and when they walked in, I'll never forget the look on their face when they realized, oh, they weren't lying. Like, they really don't have any furniture. And my friend looked at me, she said, well, where do you eat? And I said, we just sit on the staircase and we eat on the staircase. And she just was like, oh my gosh. And so I think for me, because I've just had really
Yep.
low
Yep.
lows, Mike. And everything that's been built from here has really been a slow increment up. I think that there's a piece of me that I'm like, listen, I am happy to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich,
Mm.
or I am also very happy if I get to go to a really nice restaurant, but nothing feels, I just feel like I'm at the point where everything feels like a gift. And I'm like, God, thank you so
Mm.
much. And if this lasts, it lasts. I hope that it does. But if it doesn't, listen, I know how to hustle and I know how to get out here and get
That's
after it.
right.
And so there's part of me that, you know, we'll make it in any situation. And I hope to teach my kids that same just piece of, hey, just grow where you're planted, wherever you're at, put your feet down and be solid there and be faithful where you're at.
So here you are now. You pay off $460,000 of debt. You are changing people's lives, working with the one name I think in America everybody knows when it comes to get out of debt, which is Dave Ramsey. And you've got a brand new book out called Money's Not a Math Problems, and it is a phenomenally practical book. It's not going to overwhelm you with you got to read 400 pages. It is a simple thing. And there's one key word that you and Sam had to figure out, and the word is budget. Why does the word budget, why does it send chills up people's spine positively and negatively? What would you say?
Oh, yeah, it strikes fear in the hearts of many. I think because I think as people, there's something that's in our nature that when somebody starts talking about boundaries or rules or parameters, we just like freak out. We're like, don't tell me what to do. Don't try to put these constraints on me. Don't you put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby. Right.
Yep.
There's just that feeling of I don't want anybody telling me what to do. And
Yep.
I think that's just who we are. I think everybody feels that at some core. But the truth is, like, when you do have boundaries, it's safe for you, right? It creates a safe place for you to run and go, and you don't have to worry about getting into danger, right? And
Yep.
so that's like the big picture of just, I don't know, like boundaries in general. But with a budget, I think so many of us have had experiences, whether it's growing up or in old relationships or a friend of mine or whatever it is, that it's informed us in a negative way, and we start thinking, well, a budget, that's kind of a punishment for people who don't know how to handle their money. Or a budget, I used to be guilty of this. A budget, that's for poor people, right? Poor people, you got to count every dollar and you got to
Yep.
be on a budget and that kind of thing. And then as I got older and kind of had my own money, and my husband and I were making money, it was like, okay, we've got this money. A budget is really just to make sure that you're paying your bills and like doing your responsibilities. But the rest of the money, that's a free for all. Like
Yep.
that's the treat yourself money. And that was also erroneous. And so I think we just all kind of have these views that are, they come into our brain because of our experience. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but there does come a point where we go, well, listen, is it true?
Yep.
And B, is it even serving you? Because we believe things all the time that aren't true, right? Because it's not convenient for us to be,
That's
for
right.
it to be true. And so this is what this book is all about. It's kind of digging into that. And I go through these 5 beliefs that were not true, that I believed about budgeting and handling my money, that were honestly keeping me back, holding me back. And then I replace those with 5 truths that are actually true, that I believe to this day, that have really set me free when it comes to money.
And I want to
budgeting.
dive into those. I want to grab a couple. We won't hit all 5, but I want to grab a couple of them. Number one, you said a budget doesn't confine your money. A budget defines your money. Unpack that a little bit. And why is that so big? So I told you my daughter and her husband are just massive fans. If you were sitting down with a little 20-something couple who they've been married a year, why would you tell them this truth is so big for them? What would you say?
Because I think a lot of people, when they hear get on a budget or you need to be on a budget, they think of it as a document that's going to tell them no. You can't spend on that. You don't get to have that. It's like very serious, and it's, this one, it's this negative place. And I'm like, no. It's just a plan for your money. It's custom organization. You get to decide, and all of it's on there, not just the responsibilities, but the things you want to do. Like you can put your nail appointment on there. You can put your haircut on there. You can put tickets to the game on there. It's just a preset plan and you're spending every single dollar on purpose before the month begins. So you, and if you have a spouse, you and your spouse can lock in and go, okay, yeah, we agree on this. And you have the ability to say, well, you know what? That's too much on groceries, or that's not enough, for whatever it is, grandma's birthday. And so you guys get to work around and move these numbers around like a game of Tetris and make it work for your lifestyle. And so in that way, you're just giving a definition for all of those dollars and cents that you bring home, right, Mike? Because I say all the time, we work so hard for our money, and money is so, it costs us a lot.
Yep.
It costs us this time away from our families, and it costs us, for some of us, lack of sleep and stress and anxiety. And I'm like, for all of that you're paying to get a paycheck, treat it with care.
That's right.
Treat it with care.
And money's not good or bad. I heard you say this. I was listening to your audiobook. Money's not good or bad. Money is inanimate.
That's right.
It's neither. It's whatever we let it be for us. And how many arguments from young couples could be avoided if there was a plan for the money? And there's nothing to argue about if you got a plan.
That's right.
You just took one of the things that the enemy uses, which is, I'll make them fight about this, this, or this. Well, one of them's money. And if you take that out, it changes everything. Early on, and I know you hit this in the book, and I can't remember which truth you hit it on, but you talk about, don't rely on paper and don't rely on just, how would you, so for a couple that's listening to this and they're like, okay, we need to get started. What is the best tool as far as you recommend an app that they get, and why would you recommend it?
Okay, so definitely. The app that I use, it's called Every Dollar. You can use it on your desktop, or it's also on your phone. If you have Apple or Android, it's on there. But I love it because for years and years before this app came on the scene, I was doing the paper budget. I'm writing it down. And when you have a spouse, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it is very, very, it takes a lot of work to stay up to date and keep things balanced, and remember to write it down, and remember to tell your spouse, oh yeah, I did spend, $8 at Smoothie King, right? You have to remember these things so that you're always balancing with what you see on your online account. And so when Every Dollar came out, I said, oh my, thank you, God. Because this right here, what it really does is it closes the gaps in communication.
That's good.
It makes it so that if you forgot to tell your husband, hey, I spent $13.20 at Publix, he can go in and see it for himself. It's going to be in real time, and you're going to be able to see, okay, this is how much money I can spend at the grocery store. And oh, it looks like he paid the mortgage because I saw the transaction come through. And it just fills those gaps. And so now it almost prompts conversation and prompts communication, because you're having something that you're seeing, and then you go, oh, what is that transaction? Then you go home and you say, hey, honey, I looked at the Every Dollar budget and it looks like, we got a refund. What was that from? Now you're talking, and now you're both seeing the same thing. It's not me going home and saying, oh, Sam, can you pull up the spreadsheet? And then him going, well, don't get your fingerprints on it, like all that kind of stuff. Because when one person has the spreadsheet, they don't want anybody else touching it.
No, don't screw this up. Now I worked hard at this. Don't screw it up.
Exactly.
Fantastic. And I love the real time part of it. And so much of marriage is communication. If you just will talk about something, if you talk about it, you don't have to fight about it.
That's right.
And you make people talk about it. One of the other truths, and probably one of my favorite ones, is a budget is the map that leads to all your money goals. I think we always look, and you hit this a little bit, we look at budgets as constrictive rather than really transformative. They're not just about surviving. They really are about thriving. What have you guys learned as a couple about how this budget helps you get to some long-term goals that you guys have?
Oh man, I love this question because there are so many external factors, right? Especially right now. Like inflation has been crazy, and, real estate's been crazy. And some people would say, wages aren't where they need to be. And there's always going to be these external things that do affect us, right? But when you can say, you know what, I can't necessarily control all of those things out there, but there's something in my house with my money that I can control. That gives you so much power, and it gives you such a place of, okay, I've got some stability here. And like I said before, so many of us have kind of treated the budget erroneously and said, hey, as long as I'm accounting for my responsibilities, the rest of the money is mine. I don't have to track it. I can do what I want with it. But if you really start to look, okay, if you have that's money that we would call margin. If you've got maybe $400 or $500 every month of margin, or maybe you've got more, maybe you've got up to $1,000 of margin every month, and you're not being intentional with how you spend that, that is thousands of dollars every year that's just going out the window. And what do you have to show for it? I don't know, maybe you bought some new clothes, maybe you took a trip, but if you start getting intentional about that margin, that is when you start really accomplishing goals. And that's where you can really look back and see, okay, I know what I've spent my money on. I know how I have been a good steward with this, and I can see it reflective in the goals that I've accomplished. I've saved up 3 to 6 months of expenses, or we were able to save, $15,000 towards a down payment. And we were able to do these things. And when you do that, it gives you a sense of just a good feeling about how you've spent your money, that the work that you're doing matters because it's actually caused you to build a better life for yourself.
That's really good. That is really good. And if people could get that, boy, it could change everything.
Man,
it could change. I look back, at our age now, in how money works for you as you get older with compound interest and those kind of things that we wouldn't even remember where we would spend it if we had spent it.
That's
but
right.
Because we saved it, you see the benefits of it. You talk towards the end of the book, you talk about Matthew 6:21, for where your treasure is, there your heart is also. Why do you think money reflects our heart so much?
Oh, that is a good question. Why do I think that money reflects our heart so much? I think that's a deep question. I think it's because it's an expression. It's how we express ourselves. If you're feeling sad, you go shopping. If you're feeling celebratory, you spend your money and you go out to eat. If you love someone, you buy them a gift. I think it's an expression of how we're feeling on the inside. And so obviously that's where your heart is. And so if you're spending, I say this all the time, if you were to ask the average person, Mike, hey, what do you value? When it comes to your family, what's important to you, right? They would say, especially as it relates to money, they would say all the right things. Well, I want my family to feel secure. I want my kids to get a good education. And I want to, make sure that they're taken care of. But then when you turn around and look at the statistics and you look at what people are really spending their money on, their money is actually a reflection of what's really in their heart. And what they're saying is not a reflection of that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so there's kind of an incongruency that's there where we say this is what we value, but our money is showing us what we truly value. And once you can look at that, it's not hard, it's not easy to do, but when you look at that and go, man, I'm kind of like, talking out of both sides of my mouth here, that's when you can make the shift and go, okay, how I'm spending has to truly reflect what I say my values and my priorities are.
Phenomenal answer, because I think you're spot on. And I think that's why God said it the way that he said it, because he knew it was going to be a struggle. And
it's a struggle.
It's not good or bad, but it is going to show a lot of what we believe. This book, so good. So good. And it really is a must read, not just for young couples, but for every couple, because it's never too late to start getting things in order and getting things lined up. So final question of the day. So this past weekend, I shared a statistic, and the stat was 93 to 95% of the time we'll spend with our children will be spent before they're 18. The next 5 to 7% will be over the next 50 years, which is crazy.
Wow, that's crazy.
Isn't that a crazy stat? I don't know if it's right or not, but I'm going to take it, and it sounds good. Here you and Sam are. You have been given these lives in your home that you're pouring into. What do you hope one day your children sit down in front of a pastor when they're getting ready to get married, when they're getting ready to embark on that next leg of their life, and the guy goes, tell me about your parents. What did they do right? What did they deposit in you? What do you hope your kids say about you guys one day?
I think that they will say I hope that they say my mama and papa were extremely intentional, and they always instilled personal responsibility and personal choice, and that every single day I get to make a choice and I have to deal with the consequence, good or bad, of the decisions that I make. And so I think that marrying this person is my choice, and it's a good choice, and it will have a positive effect on my life moving forward. And I hope that they see that. I think that they do. We're big on choice and intentionality and taking responsibility for personal actions. We're big on that. And I hope that that gets into them. I hope that it does. Because I think if you can do that, you spend a lot less time in life comparing yourself to others. I think you spend a lot less time blaming for things that go wrong or don't go your way. You're able to forgive a lot easier because you go, all right, like, what's my part in this?
Yep.
What you're always looking at the part that you played, good or bad, and the choice that you made, good or bad. And so I hope that that goes with them.